About 1,200 miles off the western coast of Africa lies the little island of St. Helena, a tiny dot of land in a great expanse of ocean, almost devoid of natural wealth, but world famous because of its tragic association with that so-called man of destiny, the late Napoleon Bonaparte, one-time emperor of France and dictator of Europe, a military genius who failed in his forceful conquest of the world and spent the last 6 years of his life as a prisoner of war upon this lonely isle. The Portuguese who discovered and named the island in 1502 found it uninhabited, but they formed no permanent settlement. Following the Portuguese came the Dutch and the English and the French, all bitter contenders for the possession of this little island, so strategically situated in the lane of important trade routes between Europe, South Africa, and India. For the past 2 centuries, however, St. Helena has been the undisturbed possession of Great Britain, and Jamestown, its only port, bears the distinction of having been named after one of England's kings. About 125 years ago, the British frigate Northumberland sailed into this harbor with the world's most illustrious prisoner of war, Napoleon Bonaparte. For 3 days he was kept on board ship in the harbor, while the more curious inhabitants paddled out to get a close view of the defeated emperor, who was to dwell among them to the day of his death. The thought of him who once had all of Europe at his feet, the great Napoleon, standing alone on the deck of the Northumberland and gazing into these bleak hills, beyond which a prison home was being prepared for him, is one of the most tragic thoughts in the history of mankind. The dramatic story of Napoleon's exile has left an indelible mark upon this island, but the modern St. Helena boy does not appear to be very much concerned about it. In fact, the turbulent outside world and its famous men are nothing compared to the champion rail sliders of Ladder Hill, where 700 steps and 2 intriguing railings challenge the stoutest limbs and the toughest backs in Jamestown. When it was learned that exactly 699 steps lead to the British fort at the top of the hill, the desire for an even and lucky number so disturbed the natives that one ingenious lad dug away the soil at the bottom and created an additional step, thereby obtaining the lucky 700. The present population of the island does not exceed 4,000 inhabitants, and they represent a conglomeration of Portuguese, English, Dutch, Hindus, and Negroes, not a few of whom can trace their ancestry to a ship that stopped in passing sometime during the last 4 centuries. Thanks to the humble wants of its inhabitants, St. Helena is more or less self-supporting, although only 1/3 of the island is suitable for farming. The principal crop is potatoes, and the cultivation of flax is the chief industry. But as a source of net revenue, nothing excels the postage stamp business, for a St. Helena stamp is invariably the pride of stamp collectors, as well as the premium stamp for postcards. It is said there are only 2 good reasons for stopping at St. Helena: to visit the home of Napoleon and to mail a postcard with a St. Helena stamp. And now we start out over the road that leads to Napoleon's home, the same road that the defeated emperor traversed as he was being taken to the final and smallest realm in the cycle that marked his turbulent career. Longwood, where Napoleon lived the last 6 years of his life with a small band of loyal followers who accepted voluntary exile in order to be with their emperor. Owing to a generous gesture on the part of the British government, Longwood is now French territory, and the flag of France waves here in solemn association with the spirit of Napoleon Bonaparte. While residing here, Napoleon was constantly guarded by British soldiers, and it caused him no end of grief. He complained bitterly but in vain to the governor of St. Helena, General Low, who seems to have been Napoleon's chief bone of contention during the whole period of his exile. After a few years, the prisoner's hope for freedom or escape was banished, and he finally became resigned to his fate. In his memoirs, he dictated, "No one but myself can be blamed for my fall. I have been my greatest enemy, the cause of my own disastrous fate. My aim was the United States of Europe, but fate intervened before I completed my task." And just prior to his death, he said, "There are only two powers in the world, the spirit and the sword. In the long run, the sword will always be conquered by the spirit." Napoleon died in 1821, after 6 years of exile, and he was buried in a beautiful little valley a short distance from Longwood, which also has become a French possession out of Great Britain's respect for the memory of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose name does not even appear upon his grave because of a difference of opinion that existed between the governor of St. Helena and Napoleon's loyal followers regarding the wording of the inscription. In 1840, when the body of Napoleon was taken from here to be reinterred in France, a most solemn procession marched with it to the sea, and as it passed along the main street in Jamestown, the choir in St. James's Church sang a farewell tribute to that man of destiny, whose memory is now the glorified heritage of St. Helena. And as we sail away in the path of the ship that bore the remains of the world's greatest military leader, who could not rule Europe by force of arms, we reflect upon the lesson he taught, and we wonder if the sun will ever set upon a United States of Europe welded together by peace instead of war.